Good afternoon, welcome. So this is our group's old school presentation. Our title is Save Our Few Remaining Old Growth Forests. If I told you that old growth forests can starve its predators, would you believe me? How about this one? A dying parent tree sends its resources to its children as it passes. Would you believe that? Both of these facts are true, and they've been proven by researchers from the University of Guelph and the University of Quebec. So recently I watched a really amazing episode of The Nature of Things, the CBC show, and it's called What Trees Talk About. And the facts that I just stated to you come from that particular episode. So it's time for Canadians like you and I to stand up and protect our woody neighbors. Not only are mature trees more complex than you might imagine, but they also might be our best chance to fight problems like climate change, soil erosion, wildfires, and flooding. In Canada, we're blessed with some of the largest remaining forests in the world. It is our duty to push our government to be wiser and more responsible in terms of the practices and regulations in place to guard our few remaining old growth forests. Thus, this talk will investigate a three-pronged attack to defend our forests. First, Matthew will talk about a smarter economy for harvesting from our existing forest resources. Second, Matthew will talk about how we can incorporate the valuable view of Indigenous communities and the cultural connection between the forests and those communities into the more mainstream thinking of Canada, which I think is a really important point. And thirdly, Matthew will talk about the undeniable benefits that old growth forests possess for all of us. Okay, so here comes Matthew. He's going to address economy and the cultural connections. Thank you, Matthew. Hello. We all know that forestry has long been a cornerstone of BC's economy. So personally, for me, my family's been working in the bush for the last 4 generations. And in particular, I'm going to tell 2 very quick stories that kind of show this clearly. So my grandpa Art grew up in the 1920s and 30s, and in the 30s, really hard times hit northern BC, and he was actually forced to leave school when he was only in grade 8 to work towards helping earn money for the family. Him and his brothers didn't really know what they were going to do. So they ended up going out into the bush, and with nothing but their sweat, hard work, hand saws, some axes and wedges, and a horse team, they pulled a living out of the forest. So I do recognize that this economy is a vital part of Canada. It's part of my family story, right? Then my grandpa rose up through the ranks of the forestry industry. He actually ended up working for Western Forest Products, and he ended up running the Nimkish Valley. My mom grew up in Wass Camp. My uncle Jamie, my mom's younger brother, once told me there were trees so big beside where they lived that they made the trees in Cathedral Grove look like babies. They cut all those trees down, right? Fast forward 50 years, my brother decided to become a tree planter. He spent 19 years of his life putting trees back into the earth. He estimates he put over 1 million trees back, so trying to undo some of that damage to the environment that was part of our family legacy. So those are both ways to look at how the economy of forestry is connected to our culture here in BC. But I think those types of economies are outdated. And we need to upgrade and update how we use this vital resource. So one model that we can use is following what Norway has done. Over 80 years ago, Norway decided that they were going to change their forestry practices because they were doing the same thing that we're still doing here in BC. They were cutting down whole mountains of trees, clear cutting. And clear cutting in particular is the method we need to move away from. Unfortunately, it's still one of the main methods we use because it's very profit rich, right? You take everything there and you get all the money from that area. But it's not long-sighted. It's a very short-sighted process. So in Norway, what they do now is called permaculture, and it's also called sustainable forestry. So what they do is they will target trees in an area from a long period before they're ready to be harvested. And they will actually come up with a strategy. They have a very kind of advanced strategic aspect to their forestry industry where they plan, okay, that tree's going to need to come out in 10 years. How are we going to make that happen? And then they take them out and they pick tree by tree. They don't clear a whole area. It involves new technologies, better safety protocols for the workers, and these days they use helicopters to lift the trees out. So that's the model I would like to see BC move towards, a more intelligent model that takes care of the workers. I'm not saying we should shut down logging, but what I do think is the other prong of Norway's method, which is once they realized their old growth forests were at risk, they decided no more old growth is going to be cut. And sadly, in BC right now, the truly large trees, like not what the government claims as being old growth stands, which is 120 years and older, but the truly large trees, like the 500, 800,000-year-old trees, there are only 3% of them left. And that's a really sad statistic, but we need to use that as motivation, right? That information was presented by a media site called the Narwhal, which is a little bit of a cutting edge independent site that's willing to challenge the existing bodies like the government with a little bit more of a hard edge on the way they present news. I really like that site, by the way. So we need to really think about how we utilize the economy of our forests, protect the old stuff, and take things responsibly and intelligently from those second growth and those wood blocks that are growing and that are maturing. Okay, now we're going to move into talking about the cultural connection point here. In particular, I think it's really important for us to recognize that the state we're in comes back to a really wrong-minded way of thinking. We've been put into this precarious situation by the colonial mindset of destruction for profit, okay? And now when European countries were sailing all over the world and taking over all these countries, which, by the way, I completely don't agree with, they had the mindset that when they came in, the resources were theirs and they could just take them out as they pleased. They didn't think about the outcomes. They didn't think about what would be left behind. They just took everything and to the benefit of their profit without thinking about long-term impacts. So I think we need to change our mindset. And in particular, as the Old Growth Strategic Report states, that report which we found in the original CBC article that we read, that report states that there are 14 recommendations to basically improve the intelligence of our strategies here for managing forest resources. One of the core recommendations is incorporating Indigenous voices into the planning process, into the protection process. And the reason there is those cultures, those Indigenous cultures, and in particular the elders of those cultures, understand more about the forests than anybody else in British Columbia. And that's because the wisdom has been passed down through hundreds of years. And so not listening to those experts is insane, right? We really need to bring those voices to the table. We need to empower and learn from those voices. And I think that if we do that, it'll go a long way towards starting to make Canada truly inclusive and really tying together all of the different valuable cultures that are part of our province. Those First Nations, those Indigenous nations, I think they should be at the forefront of our planning process. It's time to look back to those wisdoms to move forward. And by this I mean we need to revitalize our connection with the land. The earth is our mother. It's our responsibility to protect that environment. And it's not just from like a high-minded position of, oh, that's the right thing to do. Guess what? We live in this environment. So if we don't protect it, it would be like destroying your own living room, right? So I really think that adding the crucial voices of those Indigenous elders into the planning process is the right way to move this forward, to have a more balanced voice, a more balanced and accepting voice of all cultures. And I think that that will really advance protecting those vital ecosystems. If you think about some of these cultures, in particular, I'm talking about the coastal Salish peoples, the Cowichan band, the Snuneymuxw band, Shanaaz band in Nanoose, the Nulchanath band on the west coast, and the Kwakiutl peoples of the northern end of the island. To them, the cedar was often called the tree of life. And this was because it gave so much. It gave them clothing, it gave them food. They made their cedar boxes, they stored their food in out of that. It gave them medicine. It was essentially like a one-stop superstore for those cultures before the colonial forces came in and took over and really destroyed that culture. So I think by giving these voices more of a place at the table, we start to correct that imbalance, that cultural imbalance. And we need to look at the forests as a place of life, just as though the cedar was called the tree of life. The forests are a place of life. They bring us back to our spirit. They bring us back to our mother. And that is really what we need to move forward as an idea in order to bring back vitality to the island. Okay, finally, we need to talk about how old growth forests benefit the environment. It's the core point of everything here. So we're kind of coming full circle. The reality is, old growth forests are worthy of protection because of what they do for the environment. So I'll just list a few things. So in truth, they protect us. Kind of the simile or the metaphor I used earlier is they're that wall of defense. So if you had an attacking army coming at you, why would you break down your defenses? And essentially climate change is like an attacking army, right? It's this huge force that is going to really change everything and put pressure on many aspects of our life. Old growth forests in particular resist climate change. They resist wildfires. They purify water. They help to resist soil erosion. All of these points together really state and show why they're valuable. Now, again, that report, the OGSR, stated that a tree does not reach its carbon potential, the potential for it to lock down carbon, until it becomes completely mature. And what that really boils down to, and in terms of numbers, is a young tree, anywhere from 50 to 90 years old, still can only lock down 30% of its potential carbon. Once they become fully mature, that's when they get into that other 70%, that high-end efficiency of bringing carbon back into the soil, bringing carbon back into the ecosystems. And they produce oxygen, right? They purify water, they produce oxygen. We need them. They're part of our ecosystem. Okay, so secondly, they provide refuge for many endangered species. Just to list a few, the Kermudi spirit bears in the Great Bear Rainforest. Okay, great horned owls, cougars, the bald eagle. So we really need to think about how we want our province to be in the future. So moving on, now we know it's time to act. The axe that falls now should be the axe condemning those who are short-sighted. To conclude, I want you to take a second to imagine BC in the future. What will it look like? What will the island look like in 10 years, in 20 years? What do we want the island to be for our children, for our grandchildren? What do you want our province to represent? Will it be a place of bald hills and soaring temperatures? Or will we still have the cool green spaces where owls can call at twilight, and where you can sit beside an 800-year-old Douglas fir and breathe in that air that speaks of the ages? This then is my challenge for you. Join me in writing our Ministry of Forests. Let's tell our government what we want, and that is the protection of our few remaining old growth forests. Thank you for listening today. I'll take your questions and comments now.